Hey, what's up? This is Kellen from Killing for Company, and today we're going to be talking about the second full length from the Hungarian Death Doom band named Rothadás. This is their second album on Meszako Unoho Records, entitled Töviskert, örök, érzete, lidércharang. So I think the album of, just for anyone who doesn't speak fluent Hungarian, I've thrown in this title to, the Oracle translation device I have over here. And I think it loosely translates to Thorn Garden, the eternal feeling of temptation, nightmare bell. That's, my loose translation there, but if anyone in the watching this video or in the chat knows any Hungarian, please feel free to correct me. But this is the second full length from a Death Doom band. Their first release was entitled from 2021, Koparhant. But it's been 4 years since their last effort, and for those who maybe are curious what the sound is all about or what their sound is all about, it's 100% in line with a good amount of bands that are going on right now within the Death Doom world. So think rooted in somewhere between the Finnish death metal scene and the Northeast American scene. So everywhere from bands like Ripakulu to Incantation. There's probably greater nuance within the Finnish scene. Adrenaline, I think, is also on this album more specifically. And then from part of the American scene, everything from, let's say, Ceremonium to maybe even some Evoken aspects to this. I don't want to give anyone the impression that this is like a pure Doom project or sort of the funereal aspects that Evoken kind of has going on, but what's more important is it'll fall in line with some of their contemporaries. So anyone who's been paying attention to Spectral Voice over these past few years, and before them a band like Crips from Finland, it's definitely operating in that world. You see newer bands appearing now, like from Brazil, Fossilization. I could go on, right? Members include Tibor Hanyi, who plays the sort of guitar aspect of this band, so both guitars and bass. People may recognize him from his work in another band that's also been sort of popular within this classic death metal band world as of late with his project Cryptworm. But he's joined here by another Hungarian musician, Lambert Lidesi. Sorry for the pronunciation all over this one, but they both are in a project called Coffinborn, which is another sort of death metal project. Lambert has also played in several sort of Hungarian black metal bands. So in 2021, when their debut full-length Koparhant appears, it did so within the context of a couple other notable death metal bands that were sort of playing in this space. In 2021, we saw the release from the third full-length from Worm and the second full-length from Mortiferum. Both those bands and records were pretty well hyped and heavily anticipated. Rothadás, for me, stood out for two reasons, right? They held on to a very traditional sense of death metal with Doom influences, and they executed enough of the Doom aspect to separate it from just being another dark, murky death metal band. There's enough sort of like a melodic sensibility going on with this project. If I had to guess, I think that Tibor Hanyi and Lambert sort of come together here, sort of discarding a lot of for Lambert, let us see his black metal side and hit that sort of focus. Still wanting to do something darker, but within an extreme metal context. And for Tibor, who kind of, Cryptworm is very much, in my opinion, like a dark kind of gross gore themed death metal project. So this is one they can really kind of focus in on respective aspects within extreme metal that they potentially share and sort of discard all the other things that they would exploring in different projects. It doesn't take very long for you to kind of feel the doom aspect with this sound. Production-wise, the voicing of the guitars and the bass here are, in one hand, very much what one would expect from death metal bands right now. There is a certain level of like tonal saturation going on, but the band Rothadás means, I believe, rot in Hungarian. So it's not that sort of much of a stretch to believe that they would want the sort of guitar voicing and sound for this record to sort of mirror what the band is sort of named after. What I do think though stands out is Tibor's sensibility and how to incorporate melody, sort of layer cleaner, smoother melodic guitars on top of all the disgust that's happening underneath, is probably the key hallmark for what this band really is trying to do in separating it from maybe many bands who want to just be a heavy death metal project, right? So the opening track, Orna Zelem, we'll just go with that for now. Now, this track opens the album, and there's a repeated phrase melodically that you can hear that sort of gets the idea rolling in your head as to what Rothadás is all about. Well, the pacing of this track and this moment really highlights the doom aspect of it. There is some sort of, they develop, I would say, that melodic sensibility at different points in this record at different paces. We're going to get to the more aggressive death metal moments in a second here, but just as a point of reference, while that opening moment is much more of a traditional doom cadence, they take that sort of melodic guitar element that sort of sits on top of everything and play with sort of how they want to pace it throughout an entire song. So sort of a melodic inclusion within a death metal sound to emphasize sort of doomier emotions and drive home a greater sense of atmosphere isn't really anything new. What I do like about what Rothadás does here is there's different ways in which they include that element, but at varied paces. So if we look at track 4 later on, there's a moment where, just like the opening track, your sort of melodic guitar that sits on top of all the mess and disgust that's happening underneath, sure, it opens like that. But if you look deeper into the song, they break up sort of that doom, includes later some death metal blasting. But when they get to going back to offering some more melodic doom elements, the pacing of it this time is kicked up a notch. So there's almost that same phrase, but this time played in double time, double bass sort of driving this sense of momentum and weight with the song without sort of excluding all that sort of melodic intrigue and atmosphere. Another thing that they do really well is sort of the transitions from these sort of seemingly disparate aspects of the band's sort of songwriting. The dynamic between sort of melodic, slower paces to sort of aggressive, more blasting traditional death metal. Harnessing that transition, they do incredibly well. On the 5th track, entitled Si colto fust, there's this moment where the sort of melodic and sort of soloing lead guitar is at center stage, and then you're sort of ripped out of the dream and cast into the nightmare below. You see that transition between the sort of melodic atmospheric elements and then now thrust into all-out death metal chaos. What ultimately I do think separates this band is its sort of doomier atmosphere in comparison to many of the bands who are just going for grotesque death metal nowadays. It isn't without sort of thrashier riff-centric moments throughout this record. It may not be what makes this band sort of stand out, but there are moments that are worth sort of noticing and paying respects to. So there is this sort of like Andrebolic thrashing moment that happens on the second track, Vertukur. It just is a good moment of reference where if you just thought this is going to be a dark melodic kind of thing, I probably want to reference there's enough dynamic contrast between the moodier elements within this band to the all-out assault that you get on each of these 6 tracks on this record. There's plenty of contrast, so it's not sort of a long, slow trudge kind of record. There are 6 tracks here, and all of them feature moments like this on the record where things kick up a notch and they shake away sort of this slow moving pace of everything to all out abandon. So probably the one moment on the record where I feel overall Rothadás is underserving what their potential is comes within the closing moments of this listen. On the last track, Az Örök, at around 7 minutes in, all of a sudden we get these sung sort of choral vocals. It's probably just a handful. I don't know with how many people are actually singing within this band during this moment, but there are some clean vocals, sung sort of lower register vocals, and it's a standout moment on the record. The whole time I'm thinking, you could have been doing this the entire time and you saved this to the last 2 minutes of this listen to include them. It 100% drives home a death doom sort of sound with some really well executed death metal but sung vocals. I know it's just a single touchstone that you have closing out this record and a hallmark moment throughout the entire listen, but you were teasing us the entire time with not being able to include this, throw it in the last 2 minutes, and you just expect me to be satisfied with that? It's a great moment on this record, but if you catch this, Rothadás, please include this just a little bit more in this listen. Like once or twice is all I needed. It's a great inclusion to this sound. I don't think it's going to sort of pull them out of being a, heavy, grotesque, rotting death metal band, but it's a great sort of ripple into this listening experience that I felt the entire time. If I knew this was in their back pocket, you can sing, please include more of that. So in the end, we don't need to make this review more complicated than it needs to be. This is a death doom project stemming from 2 passionate metal musicians who are trying to pay homage to a very specific era within death metal's history, pulling from the country of Finland and America's Northeast primarily. Now, if you're in for a classic death metal listen and you're kind of hungry for that sound or can't get enough of it, you should absolutely check out this record. If you're someone who feels that sound has become a little bit too predictable, specifically coming from younger death metal musicians nowadays, your mileage may vary on this listen. I do think to their credit, they're offering up more than just dark, murky atmosphere. There seems to be some, by comparison to their first record, there is some progression in terms of guitar technique. I think that there's enough energy in this record for it not to get bogged down with just slow to mid-paced, messy death metal. If anything, their inclusion with these sung vocals at the end kind of leave me wanting for a little bit more sort of artistic risk almost. I don't want to say that's completely a left field idea, but I do think it is underexplored on this listen. Is probably my greatest criticism coming away with such a high point, but in the fading moments of the listen overall. In the end, like I said, your mileage may vary depending on what kind of sound you want with or you want from death metal nowadays. If you enjoyed the first Rothadás release, I absolutely recommend you check this out. I really enjoyed Corporal Haunt back in 21, and I'm excited that this band has continued their output. We'll see what happens with them in the future. So for my call to arms, I'm going to be talking about here for a quick moment a black metal project out of Poland entitled Dione, with their first full length entitled Astrolatry. What I do come away with when listening to Dione is just as such a young project, I'm really impressed by how advanced Christian is in terms of his songwriting and musicianship as a one-man primarily project. Now, I should say it does include some session drums from Robin Stone, who most people may know from a sort of Black Death avant-garde project called Convulsing. This is, by the way, this is Christian's music, and he plays everything: guitars, bass, piano, wrote most of the lyrics, songwriting, vocals, so this is really him. And in that regard, it does remind me a great deal of what Alos is doing with Spectral Lore. They share an interest in terms of theme, and you can hear that when their music in terms of sort of astronomy, space, that kind of exploration, where extreme metal is at some level dipping into elements of sort of prog, but they don't abandon, I think, at the heart of the sound, really what is a more aggressive or extreme metal listen. So I think that's a frame of reference. What Dione abandons, though, with Spectral Lore, or by comparison to Spectral Lore, I should say, is it's not an ambient listen by any means. So I think it shifts closer to something you would hear from Thy Darkened Shade, which offers more complex sort of song structure and a good amount of technical flair once again. What it doesn't quite get into is Thy Darkened Shade's kind of almost symphonic or atmospheric qualities that are incredibly layered and complex. Once again, this is a debut full length, so I don't think Christian's quite at that level, right? But they do represent within Spectral Lore and Thy Darkened Shade sort of high marks in terms of what I hear on this record. It seems to be chasing. You think of Polish black metal nowadays, one of the first names on your lips is most likely going to be Mgła. And while I think some of the melodic sort of choices in terms of the guitar voicing and production at times reminds me of that, it most likely, I think, is going to appeal to the latter two influences rather than the former that I just mentioned. It is a much more of a complex listen structurally than when someone would get from someone like Mgła or Owada nowadays. And nonetheless, an incredibly promising listen from his debut full length, from a very talented musician coming from the Polish black metal scene, which is incredibly rich and diverse in its history. So a great debut full length there. I did want to bring to your attention. There's probably just going to be some limited release and availability right now. So if you do catch this and there's a physical copy still available for purchase, I recommend you go hurry out and grab it because they will go quickly. I am promising you. That's all I got for you guys today. If you're interested in some classic death doom from a younger band, go check out Rothadás. If you want to listen to an up-and-coming Polish black metal listen, that should be probably one of my favorite releases here in 2025. We'll see if that comes true. I'm declaring that now. You have it on tape. Go check out Dione. And you can catch me here on Heavy Metallurgy doing album reviews, and then every Wednesday night I'm part of the album club with Marty, Jim, Logan, and sometimes TJ drops by. So until then, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys later. Bye.